Welcome to The Gut Show. This is a space for the woman struggling with her gut or dealing with a digestive disorder like IBS. I'm your host, Erin Judge, registered dietitian and gut health expert. My mission is to cut the crap and have conversations about the reality of gut issues and solutions that work. So if you're ready to poop better, have more energy, and feel connected to a community that gets it, you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Gut Show. I'm so excited that you are here, and I'm thrilled for this episode because this is a sexy topic that a lot of people are talking about and a lot of people ask me about. The question is leaky gut real? Ooh, what are we going to say? It's going to get really exciting. So first, before we get into what leaky gut actually means, let's talk about what the gut barrier is. So our gut actually includes anything from our mouth when you swallow all the way down to your anus where you let everything out. So everything in between is almost like a long connected tube of sorts. And this tube has a lining and a barrier that separates the things inside the tube from the things outside the tube. So because this is all in your body, the things outside the tube are going to be every part of your body. So the fluid between all of your organs, your blood systems, all of those other systems are outside of your body. The main role of our digestive system, or major roles, I should say, include digestion and absorption. So we want to pull in the things that we need so that our body can take, all those little pieces and utilize them, like our carbohydrates, our proteins, our fats, our micronutrients, our water, all those different things. We also want to make sure that the things that would do harm to the body stay inside the tube and get flushed out with our feces or through the urine. So we want to make sure that things either stay out or can get pulled in. So this tube and this barrier is really important because at different stages of the digestive tract, the barrier changes a little bit and has a different function in terms of if it's pulling things into the body or keeping things out of the body. So our small intestine is where this starts to really happen. The small intestine is where we start to actually digest and absorb our micronutrients, which is really incredible. So that's where we typically do most of our absorption. We're also going to be utilizing some of our carbs, fats, and proteins during that time. Our fats kind of have their own little channel, but that is for another day. After the small intestine, and this happens fairly quickly, everything moves to the large intestine, our colon. And this is where the majority of our microbes live. So whenever we're talking about leaky gut, and whenever we're going to be talking about the gut barrier from here to the end of this conversation, we are focusing on our large intestine for the most part. So our large intestine is where we absorb and reabsorb water. It's also where we have our gut bacteria that ferment our fiber, those non-digestible pieces of our plants. So we don't digest them, we don't absorb them, we don't really break them down fully. Our bacteria, they're able to ferment them, they eat them, and they produce byproducts that are beneficial to our health. So there's a lot going on in the large intestine. That's also where we're packing the stool down and getting ready to eliminate it. So whenever we're looking at the gut barrier, I want you to think about, if you're watching the YouTube video, you're going to see this. If you're on podcast, imagine this with me. Think about putting your hands together, weaving your fingers together. So whenever you look at your palms, if you're squeezing your hands together, you shouldn't really see much space between your fingers. It should be pretty solid. So this is what our gut barrier is kind of like. If you kind of open and separate your hands just a little bit, okay, we're going to allow water back in the body and nutrients, and then we're going to close it back. So allow some out, then we close it back. That's kind of how the barrier works. Whenever the gut barrier is not strong, and we're going to talk about each layer of that, of what that might look like, what can happen is if you pull your hands apart slightly and they stay there, there are little holes and there are little gaps. And so that means that the gut has now become more permeable, meaning things are able to permeate the gut barrier and the gut lining, making their way either from the body into the gut or out of the gut into the body. That is what we refer to as leaky gut. And so leaky gut in and of itself is not real. It's not a real diagnosis, Intestinal permeability, increased intestinal permeability, that is an actual symptom. And they're basically the same thing. Leaky gut is just a little bit sexier. So leaky gut is what has been marketed. It's what people usually refer to. Increased intestinal permeability is what's going to be used among the medical world. And it's actually a lot better of a term because it describes exactly what is happening. Leaky can be a little bit misleading. So let's look at the gut barrier on a deeper level. The gut barrier has about 4 different major layers. On the innermost layer, interacting with the things moving through, are your gut microbiota, or is your gut microbiota. These are the microbes that make up your gut, your microbiome, your microbiota. So the microbiota is the gut of the microbes. The microbiome includes their genetic material and more of who they are. So they're like the guards, basically, of this, of the lining and of the barrier. The second layer is the mucus layer. And this is a pretty thick layer. And this is the layer of protection. So the mucus layer is kind of like, if you think about Jell-O, if you were to try to move through, let's say, a doorway that's covered in Jell-O, you're gonna, like, you could get through. It's gonna be harder. You might get a little stuck, right? Or like, you know, things that are smaller, like ants or bugs, like they're going to get stuck. They might not make it all the way through. So a thick, strong mucus layer provides extra protection so things aren't going to get through like they need to. There's also a lot of things in that mucus layer that are going to be helpful for the different roles of the gut, which is really important. Next is the epithelial lining. The epithelial lining is a single cell semi-permeable lining. So it is meant to be partially permeable, because things have to move in and out. So after that mucus layer, we have this semi-permeable lining that's just single-celled, smaller, where things can move in and out. So the guards and the mucus layer are already there for protection. And then you have this semi-permeable layer where things can kind of move back and forth as they need to. And then the last layer is the lamina propria. This is the house basically of your immune system. So this is where our immune system lives. So we talk about the gut being the immune system. We break that down sometimes in a more generalized way to say that your microbiome, your microbiota, that's your immune system. It's part of it. They're the guards. This layer of the gut barrier is truly your immune system. And that is there to like really make sure that, okay, things aren't moving in and out that don't need to be. And that protects against chronic and systemic inflammation, which is important to know. So we know that there is increased intestinal permeability with certain conditions, especially those that involve inflammation of the gut, like IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease. Those can definitely contribute to this. We also think that there could be an increased intestinal permeability with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which is not really marked by inflammation. But in knowing that, there are currently no validated tests to study gut permeability. These are being studied. There are markers that we are starting to see in research, but right now the research is not there for there to be tests to directly identify your level of intestinal permeability. This also means that there's no validated, scientifically validated treatment for increased permeability. No matter what the gurus and the ads are telling you, there is no validated treatment for quote unquote leaky gut. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because we know that increased intestinal permeability does exist. We know that some of the things that we're finding with inflammation and what we're seeing with the health of the gut is very true. And it's central to a lot of these conditions that we're working with, especially in my practice that focuses on digestive disorders and GI conditions. What we want to make sure that we make clear is that some of the tests that are marketed, some of these like superfood supplements, things that are supposed to treat and cure your leaky gut, these are not validated. And so if you want to try them and they're safe for you, great. But be really careful what you allow in as a belief, because it may not actually be backed up by true science and research. And when those do come out, believe me, I will scream it from the rooftops and I can't wait to share it. But we just don't have it yet. And so we're going to sit and we're going to wait. And then one day we will have it. What we do know from our studies and from looking at the gut barrier is that there are some things that can actually impact gut barrier function. So we know that nutrition can play a role in this, specifically fiber, phytochemicals from our plants. Those can actually improve gut barrier function likely. And we'll talk about why. Alcohol may have a negative impact. Medication, some medications can have a negative impact. Stress, smoking, those can have a negative impact. And then outside of those lifestyle pieces, we know that there's a genetic component here. There are environmental factors, and certain disease states can contribute to an altered gut barrier function. So there's some things that could be slightly in control, as well as some things that may be out of control. And whenever we're looking at your health as a whole, and we talked about what gut health means in a previous episode, this is the reason why we want to talk about that. Because your health is so much more than the exercise you do. It's more than the disease state you do or do not have. It's more than the nutrition that you're taking in. There's so much involved when we're talking about health, and there's so many different determinants of health that we have to take into account whenever we're looking at this. And what I will say is that some of the misinformation that's going around, especially around leaky gut, really discriminates against some of these communities that might be at a higher risk, but it's out of their control. And so they need resources that are more applicable and more available to them and addressed to them versus this like sensationalized group that isn't actually providing validated information. So I'm really passionate about this because I think that there's a lot of harm that might be done in the ads and in the influencers and in some of these businesses even that aren't actually looking at the true condition, what's truly going on for each person. So let's get back to fiber. So let's come down to nutrition. I'm a dietitian. I care about the food and the nutrition. And this is something that I've definitely been interested in myself as well as in my practice. So there are animal studies that have shown that a fiber poor diet, one that does not feed the microbes, because the microbes, remember, they feed on fiber, so they're not being fed, that this might actually lead to the microbes eating the mucus layer of the barrier. So remember, the microbes are on the innermost layer, and then there's that thick mucus barrier. And so if the microbes are eating our mucus barrier, then that means that there's going to be a weakened barrier, and that could lead to a quote unquote leaky gut. More permeability, less protection, more chronic inflammation. So there's a chance that that might be what's happening. We've only seen this in animal studies. And so this would actually mean that more fiber is probably the key to making sure that we have a strong, healthy, thriving gut barrier in the absence of disease and damage that needs to be, healed and recovered from, of course. So the good thing about this is that fiber is actually known to have so many different positive effects on the body. It's known to help improve the diversity and the quantity of our gut bacteria, which means more of those beneficial byproducts that can lead to better health, better immunity, that can lead to better overall energy, and also improve symptoms for those with IBS and other digestive disorders. And so we know that fiber helps already. Fiber might be one of the keys to improved gut barrier function. And so it's likely a win-win of health or for health overall. So all that to say, leaky gut, is it real? Yes and no. In and of itself, it is a symptom. It's not a condition. There's a lot of information going around that says that leaky gut is the cause of everything. Leaky gut is a symptom. Increased intestinal permeability, which is, the actual term, is a symptom. It's not the underlying condition. It might be leading to other symptoms, but it's not the underlying condition. And so what we want to make sure that we're understanding here is that there's a lot that can impact gut barrier function. There's no way to truly test your gut barrier function at the moment. We can look at your body, look at some of these other symptoms that are coming up to see if we might be able to really work on improving the health of your microbiome. Fiber might be a key to this whole puzzle, which means more quantity, more diversity for a thriving, healthy microbiome, which then hopefully will lead to a thriving, healthy mucus layer. And then there is a need for personalization in this puzzle because we have to understand what might be leading to this issue. And then how do we really get to the root of it on a person by person basis? So with IBS specifically, what I found is that We do know that there's probably some increased intestinal permeability. And we know that as we strengthen the microbiome, as we combat the dysbiosis, which is that unideal makeup of bacteria, then we might be able to actually improve symptoms at a higher degree while including more variety and diversity in the diet. And this is what we do in our practice at Gutivate. So if you want more information on that, all of that is in the show notes. So my encouragement is to you, if you think that you may have leaky gut, if you think that you may have increased intestinal permeability, be careful with what you see out there. Be careful with the ads that are probably popping up on your feed day after day. Find a specialized registered dietitian that can work with you in your diet, your lifestyle factors with you in mind, to be able to put together a plan that might help you. And then also make sure that we're following the research so that as more information does come out of the studies that are being done now, that are being talked about, that we can all follow that and get even further together. So I would love to hear what you thought about this episode. Go over to our Facebook community, the Gut Community. It's linked in show notes, so go join if you haven't already, and just let us know what you thought. What was your takeaway? What questions do you have? Let's continue the conversation over there so that we can chat more and go deeper into our gut barrier function. Have an amazing day. I hear you, I see you, and I can't wait to be with you on the next episode.
Do you like what you heard? Leave us a review. Do you want to connect with others in this community? Join our Facebook group, The Gut Community, or follow us on Instagram. All links can be found in show notes. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on The Gut Show.